just press that.
Okay.
And it's gonna, when it stops, just press it again.
Okay.
And you'll see the numbers.
Okay.
So hi.
Hi.
So the next part will be about more of your accomplishments and more of your views in the APA community. So just like a little bit of background. As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be Connie Chung. She was like a hero for me. And then I participated in the high school news show, and I hated the way I sounded on camera and looked, so I was like, no, that's career is done. My dad wanted me to be a doctor, but in college I became an English major and then changed my focus to being in law. So I haven't always wanted to be a lawyer, but yeah, I wanted to be Connie Chung.
That's awesome. Okay, how did you decide on your career, like your career path right now? How did it all start? What were your inspiration? What motivated you to do it?
You know, when getting a law degree is a practical manifestation of being an English major and wanting to teach, because Asian parents are going to discourage you from that path. But I'm eventually going to go back to the path, maybe after my kids go to college, because of, again, the practical financial considerations. But I remember I barely made the cut for an interview to University of Texas School of Law. I was on the wait list, and I had to go in and do a pressure writing, an essay, so they could figure out how to suss out the wait list. And they asked me what my favorite book was, and I put Anne of Green Gables. So I wrote a whole essay about Anne of Green Gables, and I got in. But Anne of Green Gables, was a great book, and I read a lot of books, which I also say, again, contributed to my desire to help the world. Because if you're well-read, if you spend a lot of time in books in the library, you'll eventually develop this worldview that, there's things outside of yourself. There's things besides financial motivation. So I see in many people who are well-read that we're in public interest quite a bit, because we see beyond ourselves and beyond our ego. So I already have that inclination to help people, so to speak. And then in going to law school, I wanted to be an immigration attorney. I don't know where it came from, especially my parents didn't really nurture that at all. But somehow, deep in me, I had this urge to help people who were not part of America, who were not naturally born in America, partly because my parents were refugees, partly because maybe I felt I didn't belong. But that sense of unbelonging made me really want to be an immigration attorney, because I just have that idea since even when I was applying to law school, I want to be an immigration attorney. So maybe it's that sense of unbelonging. So yeah, that was my first job as an immigration attorney. But being an immigration attorney now no longer means being just an immigration attorney, unless you're doing business law, the corporate law. But if you're doing like the hardcore I'm helping people attorney, you have no choice but to be involved in the social justice movement. You have no choice but to do advocacy. You have no choice but to be part of the civil rights and human rights movement, which is all together, because your clients and your constituency are being marginalized by society, by the law, by policies, by people's racism, by their perceptions. And so you always are fighting for them and your constituencies. So in the midst of fighting as an immigration attorney in Texas, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, I came into contact with the civil rights organization here, Asian American Justice, and they recruited me. Bodily, flew down, slapped a letter, it's kind of something out of a movie, doubling my meager nonprofit salary and saying, do you want to come up to DC and do this? And, lobbying. And I was like, my mom was like, go. So I went. So that's why most of my career path has been now in policy and lobbying and advocacy, and I'm good at it. I mean, sometimes some of the dirty side of politics gets to me, but I'm good at it and I love it. And I did not anticipate I would be on this specific side of the helping people, the policy piece. Mm-hmm. Actually, I thought I would just be an immigration attorney helping clients, but yeah. That's how I got here.
You talk about being in this career path, having been advocating and being part of the civil rights movement is like no choice for you. What are the other things that you've been advocating? Like how do you been advocating for them besides with your career?
Besides my career.
Or like say like outside work.
It's hard because my work is an advocate, but outside of it, one way is that somehow throughout my career, you start to gain some kind of, you pass a threshold where people start emailing you, their students, and people say, you need to meet this student, you need to be part of this leadership training, you need to do this lecture at this university. And so outside of my career, I have students, actually young women, a lot of young Asian women contacting me for advice, for guidance, for references, for stewardship, for sponsorship all the time. So outside of my career, it is definitely a side thing, but actually half of my outside life is really helping young women with their careers, because a lot of them were like me. They were lost. They don't have anyone to give guidance. Their parents couldn't give them the proper guidance in the public, how to do public interest work. They don't have a lot of role models actually. And so building that pipeline of Asian women and other women who are in this field is probably one of the most critical things I can do to help the movement without, outside of just being in it myself for so long. And I'm in the government. Some people might say I'm not really in the movement like hardcore because I'm not, on the outside. I'm part of the machine, right? So that's the one way in which I feel like I'm contributing, is by helping guide their lives, their career decisions, being available for whatever they need. And I'm not a mentor. Mentorship is kind of a cheap word now. I sponsor them. I really check in with them. I'm there mentally, emotionally. I'm not just writing an empty reference letter. I spend hours on my reference letters, to make sure they're authentic and good and will get them what they need. I go through their essays and resumes with a fine-tooth comb. I give them advice on their posture, on their demeanor. I feel like I'm a personal coach to some of my colleagues in some ways, and that's what they need. But yeah, I love it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Just going back to what you said a while ago with Jade, you mentioned that your father was in prison in North Vietnam. Did that ever impact your career path, or did that ever influence you in a way?
Yeah. My father was a hard man to grow up with. I mean, the American view of his behavior is probably abusive. The Vietnamese view is like, well, that's another Vietnamese dad. So that's why I think growing up in that environment with someone who, was highly traumatized and a little broken from the war, probably affected me in different ways. And that's why, I ran a domestic violence organization for, a hot second, because I understood the work. I understood a little bit of what they had gone through. So yeah, working with trafficking survivors and torture survivors, trauma manifests itself in many different ways in people, but you recognize it when you see it, especially if you've been in it. So yeah, and you can't understate, the experience of collective trauma of a whole community of people, the Vietnamese American community, and being displaced from our country. That will pass itself along from generation to generation for quite a while. And and what I see among the Vietnamese American youth is the same kind of underpinning of grief, of trauma, of having PTSD passed on to them and war trauma passed on to them, is that all of us really have a deep interest in mental health issues. All of us have some mental health issues. A lot of us have a desire to go back to our country, and we feel that pull of the diaspora pretty keenly. So there is something to be said about collective trauma being passed on, since I see the same trend amongst many Vietnamese American professionals I've been in contact with or sponsored or helped along the years, is that they feel that desire to be close to their people, to help their people, to advocate, to push. So yeah, definitely his history is deeply embedded in my motivation and drive. It's deep, yeah, it's at the very root of it, yes.
So since you just talked about like mental health issues with the refugees and the collective trauma and all this kind of stuff, so is mental health issues in the APA community part of your advocacy?
Yeah, it has been part of my advocacy, I think. Making sure that the government is funding projects that are culturally relevant and specific for our communities, especially the work I do at Office for Victims of Crime. I think they're still trying to figure out how to reach victims of crime or victims of trauma in our community and make sure the grant dollars are used effectively for that. That's been a lot of the work at the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders under the Obama administration, was making sure that these culturally specific services for the Asian community are available and are funded appropriately and fully. And making sure that decision makers really understand mental health issues in our community, and that we need culturally tailored strategies, solutions, research, data. Yeah, that's been a lot of our work. I say our because it's not my work. It's just a collective amount of work, and a lot of people have to feed into it to make it move forward.
That's pretty cool. So the next question is going to be about the writing piece that you have made. So one of them is called Models for Effective Emergency Response in the Asian American Community. I think this is one for Katrina.
Oh,
So,
you guys read it?
Well, actually, the PDF, the link that's in your resume, it does no longer work.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so
good
both,
to know.
yeah, both of them. There's another one too that I'm going to be asking after this one. So what I'm going to be asking is like, can you summarize the case study of it, just like briefly, and what were your contributions as a co-author?
Yeah. So the case study is about what really happened amongst the nonprofits in the response after Hurricane Katrina, specifically to the Southeast Asian community and the Vietnamese communities that were impacted in New Orleans, because a lot of them went to Houston, Texas, where I was based, and we ended up having to do kind of a ad hoc response out of our office, providing information, delivering supplies to the temples, setting up an ad hoc health clinic in our office, and doing some advocacy as the members of Congress started trickling down to do their roadshow. So it talks about that response. It talks about what was flawed in the government response, because obviously FEMA and American Red Cross, which is a quasi-governmental agency because it sits in a federally owned building, and some of the flaws in their response and policy mechanisms that kind of, left out the Vietnamese Southeast Asian community, and then some of the ways the nonprofits filled in the gap, and then some recommendations, only a few, about in the future what works and what shouldn't work as well. And so that case study is from that. And then in terms of the field of emergency management, I think it definitely has helped kind of move the needle forward in terms of culturally and linguistically appropriate models in the field of emergency management and response. Still have a long way to go. And I worked on some things and policies while I was in the Department of Homeland Security in their Civil Rights Office, and trying to embed some of that in some of FEMA's documents and procedures. But it's still got a ways to go.
Are you still being part of this movement, or like what you've worked?
Yeah, I still stay abreast. I still keep in touch with my partners in my office right now, we have a mass violence unit, which is the mass shootings. We fund the entities that are responding to mass shootings, and there's a similar rubric of response, in terms of the rapid response, the setting up a center to serve short-term and long-term needs, and then the long-term mental health case management needs. So it's the same similar framework as the emergency response for a natural disaster. And so I have spoken with my colleagues about these issues, and we're examining how we can kind of tweak the framework a little bit more to include culturally specific responses and tools for practitioners out there in the mass violence context. And this came out in the Orlando shooting.